Hey everyone, we're talking about the trials and tribulations of what it means to learn art, what it means to be an artist. My name is Justin Donaldson.
I'm Grace Winstead.
And I'm Rachel Dene.
And this is the Paint and Pixels podcast. So yeah, let's get started talking about some materials. So Grace, when you're first starting out, what are the kind of questions you have about materials?
Oh, gee, God, it's been a long time since I first started art, so give me a second to think about this one. I guess there's always that, like, are cheap materials, like, are they going to do what I need to do as a beginner, as well as, like, the expensive stuff? That's one that I'm always thinking about. I do a lot more digital. This is going to be interesting because, like, you do a lot of traditional, and I do a lot of digital, so I think that's a slightly, you know what I mean? Like, I think the things
for sure
are a little bit different. But last year I took your gouache course, and that was the first time I dabbled in traditional in a really long time. And that was probably one of the big things that I was thinking, like, I'm like, are these like cheap gouache paints are they gonna do like what I need them to do, as far as like not fight me the entire time that I'm working, make it a miserable process?
What kind of gouache, what did you end up getting?
Hold on. I had
sorry.
I ended up buying some nicer stuff like Winsor & Newton. But for the life of me, I cannot remember what my oh God, the one brand. Yes, my husband's getting it for me. The one brand that it's like art something. Right there. Arteza, that's it.
Yeah, Arteza.
Yeah, Arteza.
So you tried them first. How did that go for you?
They worked actually really perfectly fine. I could notice a little difference than in like the Winsor & Newtons that I used later, but they actually, like, I didn't have like a bad time with them at all. Like, they did everything that I needed them to do.
Yeah, so they sent me some gouache, and it wasn't as bad as I was expecting it to be.
Yeah,
which is really cool. So one thing that I definitely know for sure is that a lot of people, there's this debate of, like you said, do you use the cheap stuff because it's affordable, or do you sort of go for the expensive stuff? It's a really hard toss up. And I actually think that for the most part, if your paint isn't fighting against you, then it's kind of okay. And it is okay. And the Arteza, again, for the most part, was all right. And there's a couple of colors, and I think like consistency is a big thing. If so, things like you said, the Winsor & Newton and the Holbein, they're going to be a really consistent quality in between the colors. And then Arteza, they're going to have some good colors, and they're going to have some trash colors, some colors that you're like, I don't ever want to use that.
I'm with you.
And so for me, the real question is, like, at what point is it fighting you? For me, whether it's oils or acrylics or gouache, sort of no matter what it is, one of the things that really fights against me is when the paint comes out in significantly different opacities. So there's this quality, there's of opacity versus transparency. And when you're first starting out, it's actually kind of hard to see the difference. But essentially what it means is that you put the paint down, and if it's transparent, you can see through the paint into what's below it. And if it's opaque, then what you're putting down is coming out so that you can't see what's underneath it. And some of those cheap Arteza and some of the, essentially kind of like, I won't get gouache that is the home brand of, Michael's or Hobby Lobby.
Oh my gosh, I had gotten some of the Hobby Lobby stuff well before I took your gouache course. That stuff's so bad.
Yeah, what was it doing for you?
I remember it being really thin and like really inconsistent. Like I would be able to mix up like one color with it one time, and then I'd go back and try to do the same thing, and it was like way thicker or thinner. Just it was kind of a mess to work with compared to the Arteza, which was a huge upgrade in that, and that's not even expensive. But
and so that's like when it comes out so that like half of it's transparent and half of it's opaque, or like it just won't do the thing I'm asking it to do. That's it.
Well, I think when it's really an issue is when you're a beginner and you don't know what you're looking at from it. And so you might just go into it thinking like, oh, this is just like what yellow does.
Right.
Because I know now, like, I can take any paint, no matter how bad it is. It sounds like bragging, but because I know what I want it to do, I know, like, oh, that's transparent, I should put more layers, or
Yeah.
I should mix it with white. So, like, at some point, the quality doesn't matter nearly as much.
Yes.
But also, if you start out not knowing what you're expecting, like what you should expect, like I started out with really, 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 really cheap acrylics. Like I don't even know if they say acrylic. It's like craft paint. And because I was just determined,
Yeah.
I struggled through it. And like the fact that it dries like instantly and all that. So I started mixing with water because I was like, I need it to last longer. Well, that makes it more transparent.
Yes.
So I was like, okay, I guess that means I need to do lots of layers. And then I realized, oh, I could see through these. I can use that as a way of blending because it doesn't blend well. So it ended up becoming part of the way I work with all of my paint now.
Yeah.
It's just like part of my style, you could call it, where like I can use a tiny brush because I'm like, I know what I want every little piece of this painting to look like. So I just have to get it to do what I want in that spot.
Right, exactly.
Which it comes with its own issues, but I would just I could come back around to it. I just think that the quality of paints, it's interesting how it really will affect you like in the long run if you start out not knowing what you're starting out with. Like
right.
That's probably why if I had to do it all over again, I would start out with like the main colors of a good gouache.
Yeah.
Because that was like such a roundabout way of having to figure it out.
Definitely.
Out.
I remember when I first began, I just couldn't see the difference between transparent and opaque. I couldn't see it. I didn't know what I was looking at. And so I remember getting casein and it just wouldn't do what I wanted it to do. And I was so frustrated and I blamed the paints. But now that I know how to, the difference between transparency and opacity, I can go back to it and use it. Like you were saying, like just understanding that that's how it's going to come out and what I need to do. And so that's really interesting because in a way, there's a certain amount of time and effort and a very small, finite amount of time and effort you have. And you can put it into trying to get the perfect medium all the time, or trying to understand and then being able to use basically whatever medium. I know, like you said, it's not a brag, but at this point, it's actually hard for me to see the difference between a lot of mediums. Because and so I become blind to it. And before I started teaching, when I started teaching, I was like, why are you guys having problems with this? Like there's no difference between all of these different mediums. Like they're all the same. But I'm only that way now because I've been able to focus on, like you said, what are the paints doing and how do I use exactly how it is now to get what I want, and focus on that knowledge and that technique to the point where I don't have to think about it anymore. And I think that ends up being pretty important. Like what I would suggest now generally is, like you said, let's get fewer colors, but kind of get a paint that maybe is a little bit more expensive. But really the point is, don't get those really cheap ones because they'll fight you. And kind of everything above that, like, yes, there's a quality difference, but once you're at that point, like, focus on understanding how the paint is coming out on transparency and opacity. And once you're able to do that, then then it doesn't matter quite so much, which is really, really cool. Okay. So there's another thing that I wish that someone had told me way back in the day, because for me, one of my biggest holdups was I don't have money. And everything's really expensive. And so what can we do? There are actually a couple of things that we can do. The first of all is, if you're using oil or acrylics, don't practice on canvases that are really expensive, because suddenly your practice time becomes expensive. And I want your practice time to be the cheapest thing you can do so that you can do as much as you want without worrying. And so one of the solutions for that is you can get gesso, and gesso is essentially it's white paint. That's, there's more to it than that, but that's what it is. You treat it like white paint, and then you get paper, and a thick enough paper, like a watercolor paper, and you gesso the paper, which is essentially you're putting a layer of paint down on the paper so that the paint doesn't get absorbed into the paper. It stays on the top just like it would on canvas. And so suddenly you can learn to paint where, every time I'm practicing, it costs me like 10 cents instead of $10. And that saves so much time and effort, because the biggest thing for me was it would change the way that I paint. Because like I paint for years, I painted really thin because I didn't want to waste paint, and then I wouldn't paint at times where I wanted to paint because I didn't have the money for it, and so that was a huge thing for me.
Yeah, I wish that I had tried that earlier. I still haven't tried it, but maybe I'll get back into oils because that sounds great. You wouldn't have to use an easel.
Yeah,
and
you just don't
also, I remember starting out, I thought that you had to paint big.
Right.
And so to practice, I would buy these, these like multi-pack Hobby Lobby canvases. It's like, I don't know, 10 for $7 or something. And they're like always on sale. But still, if you look at it, that's like what, like a centimeter thick canvas. You use one and like your stash is substantially decreased. So even though it's cheap enough to afford, it's, if you're broke like I was broke,
right.
You still feel like you have to have like a good painting, and like you can't just go in and just ruin it, which is what practice is. It's a lot of ruining things.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Is when I would do like traditional stuff, and I do a lot more digital and traditional, but is I would want to save money, so I wouldn't be putting enough paint like to mix. So because I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna waste. So if I mix up like a huge amount of one color and I don't use it all, it's gonna end up being a waste. So then I'd end up not mixing enough. And then you have to like keep remixing, and you never guarantee that you're gonna
quite get it right. Yeah.
and it's slightly frustrating, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really big thing. Every single time that I'm teaching people how to paint with gouache, like those first few lessons is like, you're not mixing enough paint. You're not mixing enough paint. You just need to mix more paint. Like your painting will be better if you mix enough. But I fully understand why you wouldn't, because I didn't for the longest time too. It's so difficult.
Yeah. I feel like you're wasting expensive paint, Yeah,
no one wants to do that. Okay, so there's another thing too. So I think we both mentioned it. When you're doing digitally, you don't have to worry about it, but you have this idea of like trying, essentially, like what colors do I get? Mm-hmm. That's a big question. What colors do I get? And I remember I would like, this is back in the day before everything was so publicly available. I would like go to artist websites and scour and try and find exactly what palette they used, what different colors they used. But then you would collect, the colors that, 5 or 6 of your favorite artists use, and then you had to get all of them. And now it's very expensive as well. And so and you probably do this digitally too, where you don't actually use all of the possible colors available to you.
No.
What do you do? What do you do digitally when you're trying to pick colors?
So this is kind of interesting because I have a very specific digital technique where I do like a lot of I think in layers. So I will paint sort of my scene, and I will paint everything in this very kind of diffuse way, like it's being illuminated by like a really soft kind of diffuse light. So there's no kind of light really affecting anything much, if that makes any sense. And usually I will try to pick like those initial local colors, the sort of base colors, everything is. I try to keep them cohesive when I'm doing that. And then I start painting in lights. I use a lot of layer effects. I use a lot of those digital effects. And then I start painting, and I start turning lights on and off. And I start thinking of like, okay, well, here's my key light. And so now I'm gonna have bounce light. I'm like, I think of all that stuff. So it's a weird kind of process that like, I don't really so much think in like terms of a palette because it's such a weird sort of non-traditional way to paint, but it gets me the effect I like. So you know what I mean? But
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that's kind of my biggest thing when I think of colors really is those initial colors I'm laying down like in my seam. I'll be like, okay, are these all relatively cohesive so that, and then once I have sort of my lights on top, then I might go back and be like, okay, what if we put like sort of this color light to kind of like a warm sort of rim light or something like that. You know what I mean? I sort of, I need to think of everything in stages and layers. I have a very, it's very different from traditional art. That's why I tend to actually struggle when I go to traditional art. I need to do like a digital mock-up for me to copy because my brain is like, it's in digital mode because that's just my main method of making art. So
I think it's great. I also use digital a lot. I think digital answers questions really quick.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's fantastic to actually create these digital mock-ups because you can kind of answer all of your questions in, you know, a tenth of the time.
And without wasting any expensive paint.
Exactly. And then you can come back in and focus like 100%. Like now you know the answers to all of the questions in life. And you can go back in and focus on like the more mechanical problems, like how do I get this edge to do what I want, and how do I get the paint to actually act the way that I want. And so it's always like a really good idea to split your process up so that you can really be focusing on one or two things, because like we've talked about already before, there's like a million different skills involved. You can't do them all at once.
Yeah.
I can barely think about one thing at a time, let alone, you know, multitask on everything.
All of my art creation is split up into stages. I have like, it's like layers and stages. So I do my sketches, and then I always do like, I do a totally separate value, like study or mock-up or whatever. I call it a value rough. Like I have to do my value rough. And that's where I figure out probably over half of the issues in any one of my pieces is in that value rough that I make. That does a lot for me. That gets me so far that by the time I'm to coloring, as long as I have my little value rough to go by, I can just, it's almost like rote, you know, it's just routine. I can just go right through it because I figured out all of my choices and problems there.
I love value. I think we got to do a whole episode on value.
Yes, value. Yes, I totally think we should, because values are like king. They're so important.
I have a joke where I talk about how all of my students have a drinking game where they take a drink every time I say that the value is your problem.
Yeah.
and the value is your solution.
Yeah.
Because you can say that without having any idea about what the painting actually is, and you're probably right. Let's get back to color for a minute. So one thing that you can do, one thing a lot of people do, is try to buy every single color out there. And the mentality that goes with that, aside from maybe the paint company wants you to do that, is that what you're trying to do is replicate what you see exactly. But the unfortunate truth and the fortunate truth is that you can't do that. Like you can never do that. We're literally taking mud and smushing it around, and not even that, we're removing a whole dimension from what's going on. Like I can see something in 3D and I'm painting it in 2D. Like replication's not even an option.
Yeah.
Right. So we turn around, we're communicating. And luckily for us, communication and perception, kind of like we talked about last week, perception is relative. And so what's happening in the end result is all about building up relationships. This is really good news for us when it comes to picking out paints, because it means we can actually achieve a lot with very few amounts of different kinds of paint. And so traditionally we have something called the split primary. What that means is that we're using red, yellow, and blue.
Warm and cool of each.
And a warm and a cool of each, exactly. As well as white and black. And so that's sort of traditionally how things go. And there's an even better option, which is more scientific options, the Cmyk. So it's cyan, magenta, yellow, black, and white.
That's how printers work.
That's how printers work, exactly. And so you can kind of actually get the widest amount of colors from the fewest amount of paints. And so getting that kind of really, it's the cyan allows you to get these like really, really vibrant greens when you mix with the yellow.
I remember having almost an existential crisis when I first watched a video that talked about how like those are the primary colors, and she was showing how cyan and magenta make red, and I was like, they all lied to me.
They lied, exactly. Yeah, there's this guy on TikTok. I think his name is color.nerd. And he's on a personal mission to show us all how RGB is not primary. They're not the primary. We've all been lied to.
Is he the one who makes a big deal about like indigo being the opposite of yellow?
Yes.
Okay, I've seen him on TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. And so, okay, I'll put something down below a link to him in the show notes, because he's right. He's right that like a lot of the time, the things that we've been taught are not right, and that we can actually get a wider amount of colors from Cmyk. That being said, I think we're gonna like develop preferences, and there's no exact right or wrong. But the idea is you don't have to go and buy every single paint.
No, because you think about it, color and light are basically the same thing. Like if you really break it down, color and light are the same thing. So when you're eliminating different colors, you're kind of just limiting your light colors.
Yeah,
and you can have if you have a room with just one color of light, you're still going to be able to make out what things are. So you're just kind of like building it up from there. So like if you have a yellow, a red, a blue, you're going to be able to recreate something that feels realistic enough. Like you'll have a bit of all the colors.
Yeah.
So it'll have a certain mood. You know, if it's mostly yellow, it might feel mostly kind of hot or something. But it like you might know that it's not what you wanted.
Right.
Because it's limited.
Yeah.
But somebody else won't know that.
No one's gonna know. How would they know? How would they know? Yeah, and so TikTok all the way. Yeah, and so it's. I think it was a really big moment for me when I realized, like I'm out there painting. No one's gonna stand exactly where I am on a day that has exactly the kind of light that I have with my painting and be like, you changed things a little bit.
That doesn't exactly match up, Justin. I'm not sure about this.
Yeah, what kind of terrible, trashy artist are you? I can all fit. So once you realize that you cannot match everything, then matching is no longer the goal. Hopefully, either that or you're like beating up on yourself. But then you have the freedom to limit things. And actually, a lot of the time, it turns out better. This podcast is brought to you by my online painting courses. Now, whether you want to learn to paint landscapes in any medium, to figure out how gouache works, to work your way through form and rendering to make your paintings pop and feel lifelike, or you want to learn how to make hand-painted anime backgrounds, I have exactly what you need. My goal is to help you become a proficient and confident artist, and I'm really excited to see that happen. Now, you can find these courses in the link below, and I can't wait to share everything I know with you. But for now, let's get back to the podcast.
It's a good way to start working on your relations too.
Yes.
Because if you're like,
like my aunt,
I want this for me exactly like this mushroom to be red. You might look at like if you have 50 reds,
right?
You're gonna be like, which red? But instead, you should be thinking like, how using these few colors could I make this look red? And so maybe it's just like almost a grayish orange, but it'll look red if it's surrounded by greens and blues. And so if your limited colors are just gonna train you a little harder and faster, you know?
Yeah. Actually, I think that's a really good point. Even though like at this point, I do use some really big convenience colors, and a convenience color is a color that's like, it's not a primary. It's probably got some white or some black in it. It's a mix. It's a hue,
some of those really vibrant ones.
But like, it's nice and easy to get what I want. But I don't recommend that for my students because I want them to learn how to mix their colors. You need to learn to mix. Otherwise, you're forever just picking from things. Yeah, but the good news is that with these few colors, and I think one thing that I do want to mention is that a lot of different named colors are really close to each other. And so, like, if you get a cyan versus a cerulean blue, they're close enough that you're gonna get a slightly different end result, but because you know how to mix, you're gonna get where you want to go, and it doesn't really matter one way or the other. That's also really freeing because I remember being like, the alizarin crimson, I can't find it anywhere. Like, how am I possibly ever gonna learn to paint when I can't find exactly the right thing? But realizing that it's all about building relationships, and that means that there's a little less pressure to get everything exactly right. Yeah.
You know, talking about digital colors, I'm relatively new to digital and like very much not great at colors yet with digital. Do you do anything sketchy to like counteract the fact that every screen sees things differently?
Oh god,
so
yeah, that's
frustrating.
the bane of showing your art on any computer at all.
Yes.
The biggest thing I honestly do is I just look at my stuff on, like, I have several different screens. So my laptop screen is like, it's really muted, and like my tablet screen is really high contrast. Like I have a screen tablet, and it's like super high contrast, and I can like change it a bit, but I tend to actually like the way it works with the highest contrast. So I'll like kind of, as I'm painting, I'll be like checking my laptop occasionally. Then I'll check things on my phone. And I figure if I've got like 3 different screens that are all fairly different and they all look pretty decent on that, I don't worry about it too much. Because otherwise, if I'm stressing about every screen in the whole freaking world, I'm going to go insane. So I use whatever screens I have, check, just make sure everything looks pretty okay on each one of them. And then I go, okay, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I've just noticed that my iPad makes things so much brighter and more saturated and more contrasted. And then I posted, I'm like, what did they do?
Yeah. Yeah. My phone likes to pump up the saturation and contrast, which is kind of similar to my tablet. They're sort of similar. And then my laptop likes to mute everything. My laptop, I'll like look at
Oh, interesting.
Well, that's a good way to check it though.
Yeah, and like my laptop also like it lightens, like it lifts like blacks and darks. So like I will like look and I'll notice like, oh, my really dark areas look like crap because they've been basically keyed down so much on my tablet that I can't even see them. They're almost like one value tone. And then I'll look at my laptop and be like, oh, that looks like crap. I need to fix that. So yeah, I use whatever screens I have and I just check all between them.
That's good.
I'm gonna get an old laptop.
Yeah, it's not old. It's my husband got it for me like just last, it was a Black Friday thing last November. It just so happens that the screen is just a more muted. It's just a more muted screen. I don't know if it's the settings that it has. I don't know. It is more muted and it works for me because it allows me to kind of have a varying view of my art. So
Grace, tell us as a digital artist, what is important to you versus what are things that really just don't matter when it comes to your materials? And your materials are probably going to be things like your tablet, the programs that you use,
the brushes.
The brushes
digital,
you use, yeah.
Yeah, digital, the big thing that I always notice, that the beginner thing that I always notice is everybody's like, well, what brushes do you use? Everybody loves to like go to like the concept artists or the professionals and like, what brushes do you use? It's like usually it's what program and what brushes. Like if I have your program and I have your brushes, I can do that, right? I can do the exact same thing. And I'm just like, the brushes can give you some cool effects sometimes, but that's about it. You can like, if you give an amazing artist like the round brush, and that's it, and tell them all you can use is the hard round brush, they're gonna make something amazing. As far as like software goes, so I'm gonna say that I don't think brushes really matter, other than if you have a very specific little something that you want to do, like an effect, then you might have some specific brush that you're like, this would help me achieve this much nicer.
Do you have an example of what that kind of thing might be in case somebody doesn't know quite what you're talking about?
Well, like for instance, I have a rake brush that kind of just does these lines, and it kind of just allows me sometimes add in cool textures and stuff. It's really quick, it's really easy. Some like texture brushes, theyey'll kind of like a sponge and traditional, right? You can sit there and kind of do certain textures, and it just expedites the process so much. But honestly, I use the round brush more than I use the hard browns. Like that's like 99% of my art is done with the like hard round brush. But that's the one that I notice in digital that everybody's always like, what brushes do you use? And I'm just like, people, it's okay. You can find your like few little brushes that you like and work on your like sort of foundational skills, and you can do anything. But as far as software goes, I've only ever used Photoshop and Clip Studio. And my personal recommendation for the money would be Clip Studio. I don't like the what is it? Photoshop makes you pay the monthly like subscription model. I don't like that they went to that. That really kind of like, that kind of lowered them in my eyes a bit. And like Clip Studio, it does pretty much everything Photoshop does. And they continually are always improving it. Like you're getting so many updates and you're not like having to pay for them. You pay one time and they're always launching new updates that are constantly improving the product. And I actually think that their ink and pencils are typically better than, I think they feel nicer than
nice.
So I actually like them a lot, Clip Studio. As far as like my tablet goes, the biggest difference I've noticed is I have it's probably similar to an iPad. I don't have an iPad, but I have like a Windows Surface tablet. And I have an Artisol, like it's a D16 Pro. It's like a screen tablet, and that's what I usually use. And I have my Surface tablet for like if I want to go do plein air digitally or something, I can just take it. And the biggest difference that I noticed digitally is that the Surface tablet feels like drawing on glass, and I hate it. I hate the texture of it. I don't know if the iPad's that way or not, but it's like it has no tooth to the screen. Like my Artisol has this really nice tooth to it that feels more like paper. And it's a more pleasant experience. And it's a more expensive tablet, and it's a art specific tablet. But back in the day, I even used those like just non-screened Wacoms and stuff, like the early ones, like years and years ago. And those had a nice tooth to them too. So I don't know about like the iPads and stuff, but I do think having a more like art specific tablet, I think they give you like a nicer tooth that's meant to feel more like something. And that makes a more pleasant experience in making art, at least to me.
It does. I when I paint digitally, most of the time these days I use an iPad. And I just ordered some of it's called Paper-like.
I've seen those, covers.
Yeah, it's really nice.
It starts out a little too rough, I think. And then like mine's like, I don't know, probably a year and a half old now. And so it's sort of getting worn out. I probably should replace it. I also I love it. You can see it's getting pretty worn out. Yeah,
that it really helps just that feel.
Yes.
Because it doesn't sound like it should be important, but it's important.
Really is. It really is. When I'm working on my little Surface Pro tab, and I haven't drawn on it in probably over a year, a long time. It's just that having that just smooth glass surface, it feels weird to draw on, and it's unpleasant. At least to me, it's a very unpleasant feeling. I like that feel, that like that drag and that friction. Just really, it's more like drawing on paper, and it's just. I think it's like. I could be wrong, but I think like the tactile feedback you get, I think that works with your brain better. I think your brain is used to being able to feel like where your pencil is and stuff. And I think when you don't have that, I think at least to me, it kind of screws me up. It's a weird like sensation. I don't like it.
Yeah, there are a number of head games. I know that there are studies done about the way that your brain processes reading something on paper versus on a screen.
Really?
And that it is actually significantly different.
Wow, I did not know that.
And I would not be surprised to find out that just everything about how you're physically interacting and seeing and all of that really does change the way that you process through things. Yeah. Is there anything else that you find other people think are really important that's just not important when it comes to digital painting? You were talking about brushes, and I agree entirely. I know one of the artists that I really like, Philip Ulrich, for a good portion, I think he changed to a different program now, but he was using Photoshop, and it was just a round brush.
Yes.
And from a distance, it looks absolutely amazing. and then you zoom in, you keep zooming in, and you realize it's just a round brush and it's just scribbling.
Wow.
It's so good.
That's so cool.
I feel like a lot of art is like just trying to figure out what's not important.
Can I say something in defense of brushes though?
Yes.
Because I found just like a, I don't know, watercolor or gouache effect type of brush, and I cannot stop. Like, it's my favorite thing. It makes coloring in little doodles and sketches, trying things out, feel so good. Because if you're coloring in like a thumbnail with a round brush, you're not going to put in that extra bit that it takes to make it look good.
Right.
So this like watercolor effect, it's kind of pretty on its own, not nearly as pretty as real watercolors, but it definitely, I love it. So people should still experiment. There's still some room.
No, I agree. I think if you have a very particular thing you want to go through, like a very particular end result,
yes,
then do whatever it takes to get that end result.
Exactly.
And so that's one side. Of the other side of them, I think, is the head games, where like if something feels comfortable to you, comfortable in a very positive way, like it's reassuring, it's what you want, then do it and use it. Like
the other day, Gracie, you were saying that you wanted a brush that like gave you a leaf shape, like a natural leaf shape, the way a springy brush does.
It drives me nuts.
So I had found one in the same pack that I used before, but I don't know. Can Procreate brushes be used on Photoshop?
I don't know. I know Photoshop brushes. I know Clip-Video can import Photoshop. I don't know if it can import Procreate or not.
I think you can export it as an ABR, which is the file format for Photoshop.
That would work because
I can do that.
But it might not be a one-to, like it might not work exactly the same.
Yeah, it just depends on the differences.
But probably pretty close.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing that I use a lot, actually, whether I'm painting digitally or traditionally, is something called Visref. And so it's a program that is about visual references. And it doesn't.
Oh, is that where you collect like a bunch of references onto it? That's so cool.
It doesn't provide them the references for you. You go find the reference and you put them in. And it sounds really simple. It sounds like you could just do it in program, but you can essentially make little folders, like one that you might have cliffs, one that I might have shells on, like one that I might have just anything, and collect them all together. And it just makes this massive grid that you can zoom in and zoom out, put it on the side. You can split the screen of your iPad, or there's a version for Windows that you can have it so that it floats above everything else. And so I use that. It's called Visref. I think the Windows version is called something else. Do you remember what that is? PureRef. Cool.
I'm gonna have to look that up. That sounds really cool. I've been doing just all my little references and mood boards and just like a little file. But that sounds handy.
Yeah, it's really nice because you can have it and zoom in. And so you can kind of, I know the other references are right there and I can see them if I want, and just click and drag. But now I can like focus in on this one or have the big collection all there. Sort of before we end up, I kind of want two questions. One of them is, what's the material or the art supply that you've got that's kind of changed everything for you? And well, let's start with that. For me, I know it's the Stay Wet palette. So it's this palette that has a semi-permeable piece of paper on top that is essentially, that's what you're putting the paint on. And it's semi-permeable, which means that it allows water through it, but it doesn't allow the paint through it. So your paint's not going to sink in or anything, but there's a sponge underneath that's wet. And so when you're using gouache or acrylic, one of the two big problems, one, they dry. And so you're wasting things. And two is that they change in value when they dry. And those are really big problems. They are problems that you can overcome in a number of different ways. But this is a solution to those problems. And so when I got that, it changed. It just meant that I didn't have to worry about that anymore. I could focus on a lot of other things. And like I said before, the good news is that you can actually get it to the point where you can put you can be using these materials and just be able to predict exactly what value it's going to end up in. So ideally, that's kind of a skill that you learn and that you can get to, and you don't have to worry about anymore. And it does exist. You can do it because I'm in that place now. But when I first started, and I really needed that, and it was there for me, and it was so good, and it really changed things for me. So it's a Stay Wet palette, S-T-A-Y. Oh no, just Star Wet, yeah. S-T-A-W-E-T. You can get it from Michael's or Hobby Lobby or something like that.
Yeah, pretty cheap.
So my answer is going to be a little bit different. Kind of a little answer. It's going to be, honestly, it's going to be my stupid little mini sketchbook and my like cheap little Walmart Pilot pen, because it allows me to draw anywhere. I can take it in the car if we're going somewhere, and that has like really allowed me to kind of just constantly practicing. You know what I mean? It's just allowed me to go wherever, do whatever I need to do. And I'm constantly able to practice the gesture and drawing people or just things that I see out and about. Basically, any art supply that allows me to, it like makes it easier for me to be able to create art wherever I am or whatever I'm doing. It just allows me to get in that sort of daily habit of drawing. So it's nothing fancy, but it allows me just to keep up the habit. And that has been huge for me. That just, I try to draw at least a little bit every day. I don't necessarily, sometimes it's hours and sometimes it's like 15 minutes. But I have noticed since anything that helps me keep up that daily habit has like done so much to like just launch my skills like much, much faster than they've ever really improved before.
I agree with that 100%.
Not a sexy answer, but it's true. So.
It is. It feels like the wrong thing to say, but
it feels like I should be thinking of something cooler than that, but it's,
No, I changed my main medium for that very reason.
Yeah.
The reason being like I used to use oils, and oils are fantastic, and there's so many good things about them, but they have a heavy setup time, a heavy pack up time. You got to clean things really thoroughly. And it got to the point where I wanted to go out and paint, but I didn't.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's because I was late. I was necessarily lazy, though I can be that. There's just like the management of the amount of tension between you and actually doing the practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's almost one of the most important things, because like anything that gets in the way or stops me, even if you're like, oh, that shouldn't stop you from painting.
Yeah,
it does. And so I went from oils to gouache, and I even hated gouache when I first started, because there was so many things I didn't know about it and that I had to relearn. But I could fit it all in this little can that I could just take with me wherever I went, instead of doing it on canvas, or then I could just do it on paper. Also, and I loved this when I first began, the novelty of finishing a painting and like 2 minutes later, closing the book and like just packing everything away.
Yeah.
Yes. Just like that meant that I could paint more. And that's really important. That was really important to me. And it feels wrong to say things like that, or like, but it's not.
I am lazy. So, like, just completely. So just the fact that I very rarely finish like a long painting or something and will wash my brushes.
Yes.
With gouache, if you leave them in there for, a couple hours, a few days, maybe a week, it's the paint's not going to dry and run like, even if it does dry, even if the water dehydrates out of your cup,
right,
you can still most of the time save your brushes.
Yes.
But I was going to say that I think I was really putting some thought into it, because I am not material specific, but I think the thing that has helped my paintings the most is I want a brush that has a lot of control, really springy, small for details. And then you actually had, you use like the calligraphy brushes and you like bust them open to get some textures.
Oh, yeah.
See, I don't like when people use like a sort of like a stamp effect in the paintings. Like, You know, you'll see it sometimes with trees. I really don't like that. But the calligraphy brush, the bristles are kind of just like soft and malleable, and they change. Every stamp is different.
Right.
So it's just like, aha. So because I really need something loose. I'm kind of, I control way too much about my work. And so having that brush that kind of wants to do its own thing.
Yes.
Hey, take it away, brush.
I love that. The next question was, well, I'll give you mine, and then I suppose we can go around because I don't know exactly how to ask the question. But one thing that's really gotten in the way of painting that I didn't expect was, aside from opacity and transparency, I think that's the one that I talked about before that really was a huge learning curve. And the minute that I was able to sort of get over that learning curve, that changed a lot for me. Was realizing that because I paint on paper a lot, that different papers are gonna act differently, and the sizing in a paper is the kind of the glue that holds the paper together. Changes the way that the paper goes on it. And so I got some gifts for some friends, which is these books, and they were really nice. It's Fabriano paper.
Yeah,
it's supposed to be really good paper. And I was like, oh, this is fantastic. And I got one for myself as well. And then I started painting it, and it was sucking up the paper, sucking up the paint. And it's like my paint was disappearing. Like, it wasn't really disappearing, but it really changed the quality. And I would put it down, and instead of it laying exactly where it was, it would slowly sink and spread. And I was like, I didn't know paper could do this. And this is supposed to be really good paper. And so apparently one thing that can happen with in your materials that can go wrong is you can actually leave your paper for too long. And if you leave your paper for too long, the sizing can degrade. And so in our community Discord group, we've had a couple of different people come up with things like this, where your paint, like the paper will receive the paint in one way, and then like in these little sudden bursts, these different areas, the sizing had degraded, and then it wasn't, it wasn't working. It was doing very different things, and you can't paint in those circumstances.
Not just degraded. Some of the papers just, I don't know, maybe bad, just don't have good sizing. And I think, gosh, don't quote me, I had a thing of paper, like brand new, that I think it was Fabriano too, actually.
Oh.
Anyways, little bitty one. And I swear it was like the paint would not stay above the surface. So you could actually see like the whiteness, like everything looked dull. It was like beneath the paper.
Yeah.
It was so frustrating. And I've seen people in the Discord where they're like, my colors are just dull. Why? I'm using the nice paper. I'm using that. And I'm like, I bet it's that.
Yeah.
I've been there. So
yeah.
It's hard. It's hard because you don't want to blame supplies.
Then yeah.
But sometimes
it is. Sometimes it is. And so just a little recap. Some things that we've said are probably not good things to do. Don't get your gouache if you're using gouache from Michael's or Hobby Lobby. Make sure your paper is fresh. Be aware that maybe it is your paper's fault. When something is acting in a strange way, the different papers will really actually have a very different effect. So I personally, as much as I can, I like to use Arches paper, ARCHES, because it is durable stuff, and it takes the paint really well. And I beat up on my paper sometimes, and it accepts it. It accepts it.
You use a lot of water.
I use a lot of water.
I don't use nearly as much water, so I can get away with Canson a lot of the time, and I paint pretty small, so it's not going to weigh dramatically. And also, it's cheap.
So when it comes to paper, there's a different brand, but a lot of the time people are asking about the thickness of it and hot press and cold press. So I'm just going to go over that really quick, just since we're talking about it. Hot press is going to end up being smooth. Really, really smooth. Cold press is what people think of when they think of watercolor paper. It's got a texture to it. So that's the difference with that. And then really, I used to think you could only just use really thick papers for watercolor and for gouache and things like that. but I've been getting them thinner and thinner and thinner, and still making it work. One of the things is that the thicker it is, the less likely it is to buckle. So buckling happens when there's an uneven distribution of water in the paper. And so the answer, a lot of the times, instead of just getting a thicker paper, is evenly distribute the water, which means getting water on the top and on the bottom, just getting that water everywhere and then putting it down. I don't normally like, what do they call it? Tape. I don't normally tape or stretch.
There's a way that I started to think about it. Like, have you ever crumpled up a straw wrapper off your straw and then you drop a water on it and it like
No, I haven't, but tell us about it. Tell us about
it. Okay, and it like opens. Well,
it like expands.
It expands. Like if you imagine that that's a tiny little paper fiber that's been compressed down into your paper, the ones that are wet are like getting bigger. They're opening a little. So like you have to get the whole thing wet or else it's like one half's going crazy and the other half's straight. So that's what made it make sense to me. I was like, the whole thing has to be wet. All of the worms must be activated.
Yeah. So have there been any other material doozies that you guys have gone through that have made you realize?
Did you cover about how some gouache has like honey or glycerin or stuff in it?
Oh yeah, you were talking about that earlier.
So
yeah.
Annoying. Yeah, I think it was, what is it, Graham, that I had done one of the assignments for his class that was specifically about getting big consistent areas of paint. You know, you've done it too, right? And I was like doing so good. And then it dried and there was this huge shiny spot. And I was like, what? It was darker, right? And I was like, what did I do? Did I like drop food on it or something? That's what it looked like. But no, and no matter how many layers I put, it just kept coming through or getting worse. And I don't know. I think it was, we had talked in the group, like, what is going on? And I think, it was just that the honey that's in Graham must not have mixed in thoroughly. Like,
right.
I still don't know if I believe that because I kind of mix my little puddle of paint on my palette.
Right.
Too, like not just in the container, but maybe there was just more in the mixture. I don't know. But so I don't use Graham on really big pieces anymore.
Yeah, I find that's particularly true for a lot of the whites. I know you said it wasn't actually white that did this.
It had white in it.
But I find more often than not, it's the ones that I'm using a lot of white in that get really shiny. And that kind of sucks when you're, when everything else is a certain quality and sort of it looks like it's the same kind of thing. And then you have this one spot that comes up shiny. Yeah, that is very unfortunate.
Well, then, and some paints too are shinier the thicker that you apply them. I remember I did a portrait of you once, and the hair I couldn't get right. You've got like the professor hair; it's just everywhere. I love it, but I couldn't get the hair right, so the paint ended up so thick, and just for the whole portrait was matte, but the hair was just super glossy. It looked intentional. It was not. So
just think you had shiny anime hair, like the
just use a lot of time.
I don't know, how would you fix that?
I don't think you can fix that.
Maybe seal the entire
thing. Yeah, if you want it, if it's like really important to you that it's consistent.
Like a matte sealer or something, like.
Oh yeah, so I have had that. I have done that. I've had these paintings that I finished, and I got to the point of varnishing them, and then I realized I hadn't scanned them.
Oh yeah.
And then so the answer, if I'm gonna, because when you scan, there's this huge light underneath, right? And so anything that's shiny above a certain point, it's gonna reflect and refract the light, and you'll have all these different kind of like rainbow colors turn up in your scan. And so it's kind of got to be to a certain point, it's got to be a certain degree of matte quality on surface texture. And so then I don't recommend this at home. Just don't make the mistake in the first place. But then I got like a matte surface thing and put it over the top, and that made it so that I could actually scan it. And so then I scanned it, and then I and then I made it reflective again.
How did you?
Because then I put I varnished again. I'm not suggesting this for anyone. Just making that clear. Yeah, it wasn't good.
Did it affect like did it make it cloudy or anything, or like affect the look?
Yeah, so I tried a couple of different things, and there's ones I'm trying to find it now. I forget the brand of the good one.
It's Stuart Simple. It's
Stuart
called like
Simple.
the mattest matte.
Yes.
I literally Googled like the mattest. What is it?
The matte. Yeah.
Mattest matte, and there was like literally called. I was like, how convenient. Let's
Yeah.
give it a shot.
So that actually, it is the best one that I've found for if you're gonna varnish gouache, use that Stuart Simple, the mattest matte. It is absolutely the best.
Unless you're, is it Anish Kapoor or something? Like
I don't know.
There's somebody who's not allowed to use any of those products.
I haven't heard about that.
Yeah.
But
Drama.
there are other ones where they put like grains of sand or something in it to make it matte, and that was a terrible experience. I would never do that again. I would be really careful about varnishing anything that's supposed to be matte. Yeah, okay, so I think that's a good place to wrap up for the day. So we did a lot of talking about different materials, and hopefully if you're at the beginning of your journey and listening to this, that has been very, very helpful. And yeah, there's a link below to our website where we actually have a place. If you want to ask a question of us, you can go in there, press the big red button, and ask your question. We'll see if we can answer it for you. Otherwise, we'll see you guys later.